Good morning, all of you. Welcome to the channel and to the analysis session for 28th of June 2023. So here we begin with the first article is talking about the Uniform Civil Code. So India needs it, and that has been affirmed by the Prime Minister Modi. So he says that the Constitution envisages same rights of all citizens. So as we know that it is Article 44 of the TPSP, which talks about the UCC. So he urges the Muslim community members to understand which political parties are instigating them to ruin them. So, quoting the words, if in the same family there is one law for one member and another law for a second member, will that household be able to function or not? Here's the question that's been raised. So, can one run the country with such dual system or not? Because right now, when we talk about the personal laws, about marriage, about divorce, about succession, so in all of that, we are having different personal law. So for that, in order to have same law for each and every citizen, irrespective of the religion, the caste and creed, this is what the Uniform Civil Code talks about. So right now we have it in the state of Goa, but we still don't have it at pan India level. And a few days back, we also saw that the tribal community from Meghalaya, when they were opposing the Uniform Civil Code, because they have their own traditional practices on traditions which they'll have to give up. So it is going to be a difficult task. How will be bringing all the people on the same page in order to implement, in order to bring and make it successful. So when we talk about the scheme of MG Narega, here the wage payments is done on the basis of Aadhaar based payments. It is linked to the Aadhaar cards. So government has extended the deadline of it till 31st of August. So here we know that there are several challenges in this scheme, and one of them is obviously delayed payments. So the Union Rural Development Ministry has extended the deadline for mandatory payments of the MGNREGA scheme via the Aadhaar-based payment system to 31st of August. So this is the fourth time it is extending the deadline. So you can imagine the ground situation, the situation of the workers, the people who are putting in so much efforts and hard work into different areas. And Aadhaar, it has been seeded for 13.75 crore out of the total 14.28 crore active beneficiaries of the scheme. So you can imagine the base of the scheme, that how many people they are enrolled and how many are they basically working under this scheme. So center, it asks CAG to probe the irregularities in the CM House revamp. So firstly, you need to know about the basics of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, which Constitution article talks about, if any, and then how is he or she appointed, and then the composition, so all of that. So up it says that conducting CAG inquiry is the prerogative of the elected Delhi government, and Delhi BJP welcomes this move, encouraging to see CAG stepping up. So the initial cost of construction work was around 15 to 20 crore rupees. However, the same, it was inflated from time to time. So for in like basically investigating all these incidents, center it asks CAG to probe all the irregularities. So it is suspected and it is alleged that there is like some financial deviations which have been done during this process. So 7 products from UP get GI tags. So such type of questions are also asked in the prelims examination in the form of match the following. So the 7 products, it includes the Amroha Dholak, Mahoba Gora, Pathar, Hast Slip. Then Manpuri, Tarkashi. Then we have the Sambalhorn Craft, Bagpat Home Furnishings, and Barabanki Handloom Product. Then we have Kalpi Handmade Paper. So these are the products that have been given the GI tag. So Amroha Dholak, it is a musical instrument, is a dholak. It is made of natural wood. Then mango, jackfruit, and teak wood. It is preferred for making this dholak. So wood from mango and shisham trees, they are used to carve the multiple sized and shaped hollow blocks, which are later fitted with animal skin, and that is mostly the goat skin to create this instrument. But again, as we say that animal skin is used, so that is also leading to violation of Cruelty to Animals Act, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, and then further like details have been provided for each one of them, so you can just go through it. Coming to the editorial page, so here, so tracing the arc of American exceptionism for India. So since we know India and US relationship, they're in news because of the Indian Prime Minister's visit to US. So we have covered a lot of articles about it, but this one is talking about the American exceptionism for India. So when we talk about the civil nuclear deal that was signed in 2008, so in 1998, just 6 months after the US, it imposed sanctions on India mandated by the Arms Export Control Act. Mr. Clinton signed a waiver to the sanctions on both India and Pakistan. So the Bush administration's push for the civil nuclear exemptions resulted in India-US joint statement 2005, a waiver under the Non-Proliferation Act, and the Henry Hyde Act and 123 agreement with India, which also led to an India-specific exemption at the Nuclear Suppliers Group in 2008. So the Obama visit to Delhi in 2010, it's a breakthrough in the implementing all the waivers of the previous decade to make another set of exceptions for India on export controls and high technology trade and transfers under the US Export Administration regulations and international traffic in arms regulation. So the significance of all these exceptions, which is much more important for us. Obviously, you need to know about all these exceptions as in order to substantiate your point. But the significance of all these exceptions, it was that they were made despite the fact that India never joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty regime, nor did it sign the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So it becomes very, very important and significant for India that in such a scenario, still exceptions were taken for India. So most importantly, these were India-specific waivers, which were not available to other non-NPT countries like Pakistan, and they were crucial indicators of the shift in US alignment in South Asia. So this is one important area. Then talking about the Russian angle, because definitely Russia is India's one of the most important partners, as we say that it is India's an all-weather friend. So even in this case, because obviously USA and Russia, they are not in good terms, but India and Russia, they are important partners. So how in this scenario, USA basically, how did it act to India-Russia dependence on each other? So over the past decade, we saw that the US favors, they have been on regulations dealing with Russia, like the countries, America's adversaries through Sanctions Act, which is called as CARTSA. So America, it has used this CARTSA Act to impose sanctions on countries who are dealing with Russia. However, when we see it in case of India, so the Trump administration, it avoided sanctioning India for the Russian S-400 missile system, but it sanctioned Turkey and China for the same purchases. So again, this was one exception which we saw. And in 2022, the US House of Representatives had passed the Khanna Amendment, which is like, which if made law, it would exempt India entirely from the CARTSA sanctions. So this is like still not a law. So once it is passed, so India would be entirely exempted from the CARTSA sanctions. So that is one thing. So in the wake of the Russian war in Ukraine, also USA, it has ruled out secondary sanctions against India for its considerable oil imports or the defense engagement from Russia. So even in current situation in the Russia-Ukraine war, we have seen how India's dependence upon the Russian crude oil, it has increased from merely 1% to around 40%. And despite that, we are seeing that no secondary sanctions have been imposed on India for this. So this is indeed an exception again, given that Mr. Biden, he ordered sanctions in 2022 on even German entities for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So finally, there are International Religious Freedom Act exemptions the US has accorded India for the past 4 years. So despite repeated recommendations from the US Commission on International Religious Freedom to place India on a list of countries of particular concern, which includes China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Myanmar. So the State Department has again not complied with this thing. And it is pertinent to note that all these exceptions, they have been made for India. So all of these are India specific, despite its disavowal of ever becoming an ally or alliance partner, and in spite of its strong ties with US adversaries such as Russia and Iran. So even in case of Iran, we have the Chabar port. So even in that case, we do not see any kind of hurdle from USA towards India. So the exceptions, they have come without India accepting the conditionalities on cutting ties with these adversaries, withdrawing from the groupings like Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS, that was a challenge to the US-Europe world order, or of any commitments to join US military operations against them. So this is India has not been pressurized to do so. So these were all the examples of the exceptions that have been taken by USA for India. So this was an important thing for us to go through. Apart from this, that's all in this article, which was an important element for us to discuss. Moving further, strategic high. So India and US, they have entered a new era of mutual trust and cooperation. So again, we have already had a look at the different agreements, the different areas that we're cooperating right now, and we're engaging more on which all areas. So top among their shared concerns is China and its expansion in the Indo-Pacific. So we're talking about the concerns or the threats basically when we say SWOT analysis. So we're talking about the threats. So US also wants to wean India away from its defense partnership with Russia in the long term. So you can see it wants India to wean away, but there's no pressure on India right now. So from a technological perspective, the newly announced joint initiatives in the jet engine production or be semiconductors and space technology, and that presents an opportunity for India to develop a defense industry of its own and improve its technological competence across the board. So this is the opportunities part that exist, and India and US, they have already signed the 4 foundational agreements, and we regularly conduct the joint military exercises as well. So that's there. And while its embrace for the US, it is getting stronger, deeper, and more comprehensive, India is also cognizant of the need to maintain its strategic autonomy at the same time. So US strategy at the moment is focused on creating new bipolarity in the world, which India is not comfortable with. So when we talk about the multipolar world, that's what India favors. So getting caught in the power rivalries of others is the last thing that India wants. And the good thing is that US is increasingly aware of that concern about India. So India's desire to protect its borders and sovereignty aligns with the US interests as well. So there is no problem as such in this aspect. And this is a new era of mutual trust between the two countries, and it should act as a force for stability in the region. So you need to also focus upon the way the things are written. Basically, what is the language? What is the tone of these editorials, these articles? And you can basically learn, and you can obviously use them in your answers, because that kind of way shows how formal you are, or whether you know the keywords related to any topic or not. So that has a different kind of impression on the examiner. So the model for quality and inclusive education. So here, one of the models is being talked about. So we have the recent 2023 National Institutional Ranking Framework. It shows the consistent success of Tamil Nadu in providing both good quality and inclusive higher education. So here, basically, we can take away what we can take away from this article is the model of Tamil Nadu in terms of qualitative and inclusive higher education, which we can cite in our answers. So we'll just go through the basics and not much details about it. So here we have the NIRF ranking, which was adopted by the Ministry of Education to rank institutions of higher education in India. It shows a noteworthy feature of Tamil Nadu. So specifically this year's rankings, we saw top 100 colleges in India reveals the consistent success of Tamil Nadu in providing higher education that is both of good quality and it is inclusive in nature as well. So it is also in congruence with the state's motto of development with social justice, and it offers an important insight for other states as well to learn from the experience of Tamil Nadu. So here, when we talk about this ranking framework, so the indicators, the parameters which it uses, let's have a look at them first. So it is basically takes into account teaching, learning, and resources, 40% of the weightage, graduation outcome, then research and professional practices, outreach and inclusivity, and then perception. So these are different parameters. So each of these parameters, then they have further several components. So we've already seen that almost like top 100 colleges are from Tamil Nadu. So is the performance of Tamil Nadu in congruence with its motto of development with social justice or not? So specifically at the top ranked colleges, they're largely confined to Chennai and thereby catering primarily to the urban elites and advantaged social groups, or they are they really dispersed and catering to the rural and socially disadvantaged groups also or not? So here we see that Chennai, it accounts for only 9, that is 26% of the colleges. Then we have Coimbatore with an equal share and it competes with Chennai quite consistently. Then we have Tiruchirappalli with 5 colleges is the next. And the remaining colleges, they are widely spread across 11 places. So this broad pattern, it was seen in other years as well. So we can say that the institutions, they are dispersed across different regions and not just concentrated in few locations. And yet it is also likely that the top ranked 23 colleges from the 3 cities, which is Chennai, Coimbatore, and Tiruchirappalli, which belong to 3 different regions, they might be equally serving the poor and disadvantaged social groups from these regions as well as their contiguous to them also. So Tamil Nadu, it not only has one of the highest reservation quotas, but also it has been quite effective in its implementation of the reservation policy. So as we say, for everything, almost every scheme and policy that not just, formulating a scheme is important, but ensuring that it is effectively being implemented is the actual thing that we are aiming for. So additionally, we see that since more than 1/3 of the top ranked colleges, they are dispersed across the places. So they are not only catering largely to the rural and underserved areas, but also provide an opportunity for quality education for the students from poor and disadvantaged social groups. So firstly, first thing that we see is that the education institutions, they are highly dispersed across different regions, and then they are also catering to the needs of the people from the poor and disadvantaged sections, and they are also getting quality education. So the colleges which are based out of the Chennai in general and other districts in particular, they promote both quality and inclusion and thereby contribute to the goal of development with the social justice. So Tamil Nadu's impressive and consistent performance in the higher education shows that quality and inclusion can be achieved together and consistently. So this finding should promote other southern states as well, which also have a reasonably inclusive and effective social welfare architecture to introspect why they lag far behind and inspire them to take action to rectify the issues which exist in the different states. So this is one model which we can cite in our answers. So what are the concerns about India-US digital trade? So here we're taking a just one topic. So what is the current status of India-US technology trade? So notably in the previous financial year, we saw the US emerged as India's biggest overall trading partner with 7.65% increase in the bilateral trade to somewhere around $128.5 billion. So, however, in case of digital or the technology services, they did not emerge as one of the sectors at the forefront of this bilateral trade. So, because here we are having some concerns, that is the main thing why the sector is lagging, and at the same time, we can say that some potential definitely exists in case of the digital trade between both the countries. So US basically it ran a 27 billion deficit in trade and digital services with India in 2020. So in recent past, we see how the two countries they have been ramping up their technology partnership with moves like the ISET, which is the recent initiative, which stands for the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology, that has been announced recently. And additionally, under this, India and US, they also established a strategic trade dialogue with a focus on addressing regulatory barriers and aligning the export controls for smoother trade and deeper cooperation in the critical areas. So why have US technology firms, they have flagged certain things for certain concerns. So the CCIA, while appreciating the reinvigorated efforts to ramp up the trade through the bilateral initiatives, it has flagged in its note the significant imbalance and the misalignment in the India-US economic relationship. So the USA's extension of the market access, trade and openness to the Indian companies to operate and succeed in the US has not been reciprocated by the Indian side. So this is one imbalance which exists between the two. And to describe these discriminatory regulation and policies, it cites the examples of India's guidelines on the sharing of geospatial data, which it accuses of providing preferential treatment to the Indian companies. So there's basically a difference between how you deal with the domestic companies and the foreign companies. And then again, it is also expressed discontent over India's veering away from the long-standing democratic norms and values and seeking greater government censorship and control over the political speech, which it argues has made it extremely challenging for US companies to operate in India. So these are some of the concerns which exist and which needs to be addressed for more smoother cooperation from both the sides. Then there are some concerns related to the taxation measures as well when we talk about the equalization levy. So one of the taxation tools that the US tech firms have long taken exception to is the expanded version of the equalization levy that India charges on the digital services. So India in 2016, with the goal of equalizing the playing field between the resident service suppliers and the non-resident suppliers of digital services, they imposed a unilateral measure to levy a 6% of the tax on specific services received or receivable by a non-resident not having a permanent establishment in India and from a resident in India who carries out the business. So a 6% equalization levy is applied. So that's there. That is one of the concerns. So equalization levy, when it was first introduced in 2016, it led to double taxation, further complicated the taxation framework. So basically, when we talk about ease of doing business, so that's how it is felt that it has complicated the process. So besides, it also raised the questions of constitutional validity and compliance with the international obligations as well, because we definitely were a signatory to the double taxation avoidance agreement also. So since it is being said and written that it led to double taxation, so even that was violation of the DTAA. Then talking about the India's IT rules 2021, so the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and the Digital Media Ethics Code 2021, it has been flagged by the consortium of the foreign technology firms as some of the most problematic policies. So it is being termed as some of the most problematic policies you can see, and the IT rules place compliance burden on social media intermediaries and the platforms with 5 million registered users or more, which means that several US firms, they end up falling under this ambit. So it would be the entirely their own responsibility. So that is one of The another concerns and some points of concerns raised are the impractical compliance deadlines which exist and the content takedown protocols which are there. So the IT rules, it requires the intermediaries to take down the content within 24 hours upon receiving a government or the court order. And the platforms are also required to appoint a local compliance officer as well. So with the amendments made to the rules late last year, we are seeing that social media intermediaries are now obligated to remove within 72 hours the information or the communication link in relation to the 6 stipulated prohibited categories of content as and when a complaint arises. So basically, the things have been like, obviously, it is then important to, talk, when we talk about the social media regulation. So right now, there is no specific body which looks into it. So they're like self-regulatory in nature as of now. But the rules which exist in India, they're much more stricter. And that's why basically these are some of the concerns of the foreign companies or the US companies when we talk about. So this is making things a little difficult for them to adhere to all these things and proper work in this time period which has been mentioned over here in these rules. So right now we are also having the digital person data protection bill. So right now, like, it is not a law as of now, it has not been passed, but still, this is also one of the concerns where we see that India, with more than 79 million active internet users representing more than 50% of the population, is a gold mine for data. So country is also planning to become a hub for data processing and wanting to host the data centers and cloud service providers as well. So this is another potential area which exists. So this means that India's policy on the flow of the data across the borders, that will also impact the same on the global level. And as and when we have seen this in even in the GDPR case, which is the European Union's landmark journal data protection regulation. So again, data safety and privacy, that is also an important area. So while there are various arguments in favor of data localization requirements, that the companies, they will have to store the entire data locally and they can't store it in servers which are based outside India. So here such requirements are also tend to significantly increase the operating cost of the companies, and it can be seen as a discriminatory by the foreign companies. So foreign tech companies like talk about Meta and Amazon operating in India, they find it convenient to store their data in US or wherever they have their servers. So that is another concern area. Then there is another concern about the draft telecommunications bill. Like, they have concern about each and every law which exists in India, be it IT Act, the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, which is right now in the form of a bill stage, and then thirdly, the telecommunications bill. So talking about this third bill, so they have like sweeping regulatory ambit in it that would redefine the telecommunication services to include a wide range of internet-enabled services also that bear little resemblance to the telephony and the broadband services previously, which were governed by this regulatory regime. So basically, when you make like calls through apps like WhatsApp or other apps that you use, so it is basically indicating towards that they might also be included under the new definition of the telecommunication services. So basically, it is talking about increasing the ambit. And here, the current draft of the bill, it puts both the telecom service providers and the over-the-top communication services under the definition of telecommunication services. So here it includes apps like WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, Google Meet, etc., which would fall under its ambit. So here the concern is that it would subject a number of platforms to the onerous obligations. Basically, their obligations would increase, including licensing requirements that would be required, government access to the data, encryption requirements, internet shutdowns, seizure of the infrastructure, and possibly monetary obligations for the sector. So the industry body contends that the law would impose a first of a kind global authorization or licensing requirement for any digital form. So these are all the policy barriers, we can say, which exist, and we have discussed in all details the different concerns. So this is a good article. Then again, this article is talking about the feminist approaches to international relations. So, feminist perspective on the global politics calls for gender to be an empirical category of analysis when it comes to the foreign policy or security or diplomacy. So, however, such approaches they still remain marginal. So, after the Second World War, the global order was undergoing various shifts, which could not be explained by just the traditional theories of interstate war and conflict. So we saw the rise of violent trans-state actors and groups and ethnic conflicts and tensions and relatively peaceful ending of the Cold War. They were markers of a changing global arena where the state was not just only player. So this called for different and varied approaches to look at the international relations, not just as an order of the states and relations among them, but where multiple actors and institutions factor in. So the feminist approach to international relations is one such perspective which sees the international arena through primarily a gendered lens. So when we talk about women in war, international conflict, women they are mostly spoken of in terms of needing protection as they are vulnerable group. So this imagery of the need to protect women from foreign invaders, it is often invoked while asking young men to conscript, and however, this has also led to them to be invisible from featuring in talks and processes of war. So here an example is also mentioned of the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 through a gendered lens. So here the analysis, as per the analysis, the war through the American housewives and the Iraqi women and how their lives are increasingly militarized. So here how basically their role as women and specifically women as a category ensure the smooth functioning of the war machine. Definitely like their role is also talked about. And so the second generation of the international relation feminist theoreticians, they started to expand on the idea of what exactly a feminist perspective on the global politics would look like and how gender should become an empirical category of analysis when it comes to foreign policy, security, or the global politics. So that's how the stance a little changed and shaped a little more. And here it has taken multiple forms in the international venues. So when we talk about the categories of the women in international development and the gender in the development and feminist approaches to it, they have looked at how male bias has led to poor outcomes in implementing projects to eradicate poverty, prevent conflict, and empower communities. So even in these areas, the role of women is very important. You can't just ignore it. So similarly, feminist security studies, it aims to broaden the narrow scope of security and bring in the domestic violence, the rape, poverty, gender subordination, and ecological destruction under the umbrella of global security threats. So that's another thing. But it was also seen that they did not fundamentally challenge the traditional ideas of international relations and it questions their content. So the traditional ideas were not challenged, basically, their components were challenged. So there exists gender gap in the geopolitics and the disproportionate effect of war on women in the form of sexual violence and trafficking. They call for more female participation in high-level politics and contend that the presence of more women leaders would facilitate peaceful and humanitarian policies. Then thirdly, we have the constructivist feminist theory in international relations, and it looks at how gendered identities they play a role in the global politics. So it does not look at the gender as just a variable of analysis like the liberal feminism, but as the core component which influences structures and the personal relationships. So it places emphasis on the idea of gender and how it upholds the unequal global material conditions. So it emphasizes on the language and the meaning making. So it talks about the binary linguistic oppositions in international relations like order, anarchy, developed, underdeveloped, national, international, which perpetuate and seek to empower the masculine over the feminine. And then we have another approach, which is the post-colonial feminist approach, and it seeks to challenge the assumption of universality of women's experience across the regions and cultures. So it's especially critical of the liberal feminist approach of looking at women in the global south as powerless, lacking agency, and helpless, or as one homogeneous category. So these are different approaches, and definitely this article is very, very important. So definitely with time, we are seeing that these feminist international relations theories, they have gained traction over time and they still remain marginal within the discipline. So with the environmental policies or the non-state actors playing an even bigger role in the global arena, feminist theories, they have much potential in analyzing and offering real world solutions. For example, when we take the case of the rise of ISIS and their targeting of the Yazidi women and the armed resistance by the Kurdish women against the terrorist group, could use any of the above approaches to not only make meaning out of the existing situation, but also offer a fresh perspective on the impact of non-state actors on individuals and their communities. So we have taken this topic before, but again, it's a repeat that talking about the sedition law, whether it needs to be completely repealed or whether we need to continue with it with some amendments or not. So the sedition law, it must to remain India's integrity, retain India's integrity. So it's a very important thing, very important pillar we can say when it comes to retaining India's integrity. So we can't, completely repeal it under the garb of decolonization. So here the Law Commission Chairman Justice Rituraj Avasti says enough safeguards had been proposed to prevent the misuse of Section 124A of IPC. So it talks about sedition. So the panel also recommends bridging the big gap in the punishment tenure by increasing the term from 3 to 7 years as per the severity of the crime. So UAP or the National Security Act operate in different fields and they does not cover the offense of sedition. So therefore, a specific law on sedition need to be there. So firstly, we need to ensure that we are able to prevent its misuse. Then, so there's disparity in the terms. So under the existing provisions of Section 124A, the punishment, it can be up to 3 years of imprisonment with or without fine, which may go up to the imprisonment for life or with or without fine again. So we have found that there's a big gap in the punishment provision, and it says that it needs to be increased up till 7 years. So these are some of the recommendations the Law Commission regarding sedition law. So registration of birth and death by Aadhaar authentication has now been allowed, and center it is allowed the Office of the Registrar General of India to perform Aadhaar authentication during registration of the births and deaths in the country. And however, it is not mandatory as of now. So a Gazette notification was published by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which allows the RGA office to use the Aadhaar database for authenticating the identity details provided during the registration of births and deaths. So in 2020, we saw that it notified the rules stating the center, it may allow Aadhaar authentication by requesting entities in the interest of good governance, prevention of leakage of the public funds, and to promote ease of living. So center it is also planning a new bill on the stray dogs issue. So obviously this has become a very popular issue. So this is a kind of a case study also, which can be like relevant for GS4 ethics paper. So center it will soon formulate a law on the issue of the stray dogs. So here the angle of ethics, basically there's one thing that you can like whether go for killing the dogs or whether you can euthanize the dogs or not. So there are different aspects. So for us, the draft of the bill, firstly, that would become important. What would be the important provisions under it? And we are seeing incidents of stray dogs attacking people and children, and then they are dying. So that this issue becomes important, and obviously the angle of cruelty to animals comes in. And then there was one Supreme Court judgment which was talking about that whether you can give the rights which are equivalent to human rights to animals or not. So all these are different aspects which one must know. Yesterday we saw tomato prices crossing rupees 100 a kg mark, so top scheme, that is important. And the sowing has been basically affected, because of which we are seeing a supply crunch. So even in case of tur dal, we are seeing the prices going up. So as prices rise, the buffer stock of tur dal to be released. So this is a situation when the government basically uses the buffer stock which is present with it in order to increase the supply in the market and bring down the prices. Coming to the world page, so here, see what are the new developments for us. So Russia to transfer the Wagner hardware to the army, and Prigozhin, he finally arrives in Belarus. So you proved your loyalty to the people of Russia and the military oaths. You showed responsibility for the fate of the motherland and its future. So Putin tells this to troops. And FSB says that the criminal case against Wagner forces that has also been closed. So here, Sri Lanka, it will not be used as a base against India. So for any threats against India, it's coming from the president of Sri Lanka, said, asserting that the island nation remains neutral, having no military agreements with China. Coming to the business page, so no forex or money market transactions on 29th of June. So this change which has been made by, well, it's been done recently. So with the government of Maharashtra declaring June 29 as a public holiday under Section 25 of Negotiable Instruments Act 1881 and cancelling the public holiday of 28th of June, RBI said that there will be no transactions in government securities, forex, money market, and rupee interest rate derivatives on 29th, and settlements of all the outstandings, it will be like which are due on 29th will accordingly get postponed to the next working day. So quarter four current account deficit, it narrows to $1.3 billion as trade deficit shrinks. So there are two conditions under which trade deficit it can shrink. Either our exports increase or the import are also falling. So the current account deficit narrows to 0.2% of GDP from $13.4 billion, or we can say 1.6% in year earlier period. So this is as per the RBI data, which has been recently released. So it says that moderation the trade deficit in January to March quarter, and even the rise in services exports is basically helping us a lot in narrowing it down. So that is one of the basically definition the potential areas of India, very important key area when we talk about the services exports, and then the amount of remittances that we receive, that play an important role. The amount of net foreign direct investments, they were recorded as $6.4 billion. They were higher than $2 billion in quarter three. So even FDI, that is also increasing. And when we talk about the trend of FDI, you need to know about at least the past 5 years trend of FDI, from which countries we are getting the maximum amount of FDI, which states are getting the maximum amount of FDI, and which sectors are getting maximum amount of FDI. So all these areas need to be known. Coming to the Mint newspaper. So coming to the Mint newspaper, here we see recently that Ministry of Power, it has notified time of day or TOD tariff for the electricity, which comes into force next year for the commercial users and in 2025 for the home users. So it's still like there's time, but let's understand what is the entire thing. So what is actually what do we mean by time of the day tariffs that would be applicable, and how does it impact you, and why it is important for the sector as well. So this graph is showing us the electricity demand during the day in Delhi on 23rd of May. So from 8 a.m. you can see the demand starts to rise up till we can say evening time. That is around we can say up till 4 o'clock, and then it starts to decline. Then we saw again a small rise during the night time. So these are two main time periods during which we saw the electricity demand rising up during summers. This is obviously specific to Delhi. So what is this time of day tariff, which is going to be applicable in future? So the government, it has amended the Electricity Rights of Consumers Rules 2020 to make two changes. One is this introduction of time of day and rationalization of the smart meters. So these tariffs that will be based on the usage by the time of day, whereas the current system, it charges a flat rate. So basically, this is pointing towards promoting more efficient utilization of energy. And during the daytime, the tariff, it could fall as much as 20% as well, which can benefit the consumers. And while at night also, it would go by the same amount. So this will potentially help the power companies to balance the peak power demand as well, while giving the consumers the ability to regulate and manage their consumption and also control their bill. So that is the idea behind it. So will the electricity bills, will they go up due to this new change or not? So for a small working couple family where the usage is mostly at night, there will be an increase in the bill. So it all depends upon your time period of usage of the electricity. So accordingly, your bill would be varying. So other households, they would be able to offset some of the nighttime spike with their usage during the day. So typically there's a spike in the power consumption in morning as we see schools and offices, they open up. So then in the late afternoon, when the children they return home, while the factories and offices they're still working, and finally in the early evening. So this is when the air conditioners, coolers, they're on full blast in the households during summers, and heaters and geysers during winter. So this time of day tariff, it will try to discourage the consumers from using too much power at this time. So these are the peak hours. So in order to basically ensure efficient utilization of electricity during these peak hours, this is the main idea behind this new introduction. So what are basically the main power guzzling appliances? Basically the appliances which use maximum amount of, or we can say most of the electricity in households. So that includes air conditioners, coolers, refrigerators, heaters, and geysers. They are typically the big guzzlers at home. And then other includes washing machines, dishwashers, and microwaves. So appliances that are used the most and for longer duration, like when we like using fans and lights, they use less power. So they are energy efficient versions of almost all the electrical appliances which exist in the market. So do we have the required amount of infrastructure? Are we ready to deal with this new introduction or not? So we'll need more smart meters, which explains the other amendment. So since we saw that two amendments has been done, so for that we need more installations of smart meters in the households. So these smart meters, they actually they automate the meter reading process, and they enable accurate cost estimation, reducing the wastage of electricity. So on average, these meters, they send the information about the consumption directly to the power distribution companies every 15 minutes, which is essential to calculate this time of the day tariffs. So for we see that so far over 6.5 million smart meters they have been installed in the country, and by 2026 we have the target to take it up to 250 million. So you can see so much gap exists, and till date about 230 million they have been sanctioned as of now. But it is important to ensure that they are installed in the households or the required places that we need them to get installed. So we need to ensure that we basically meet up this target, then only this time of the day tariffs, they would be meaningful. So coming to the quote of the day, so it goes like, so India does have the opportunity to leapfrog into artificial intelligence and generative AI now How far and how long it will take is anybody's guess. So generative AI is something that's maturing, and it's not something that's completely mature as of now. So this is coming to the chairperson and CEO of the Salesforce India. So falling crude oil, it shrinks the current account deficit in the March quarter to 1.3 billion. So sequential decline of the current account deficit from quarter three was mainly on account of moderation in the trade deficit. So when you talk about the current account deficit, you need to know about all the components about balance of trade and the balance of invisibles, and how do we actually calculate them, then the further components which are included in these two parts. And then also you need to have clarity about balance of payments as well, the entire structure of it. So India's current account deficit is narrowed down to $1.3 billion of GDP. So trade deficit is the largest component of the current account deficit. It occurs when the value of the goods and services that a country imports, it exceeds that of the value of that it exports. So basically, deficit occurs when we are importing more than what we are exporting in terms of the value. So here we are seeing that the trade deficit, the balance of trade that I'm talking about, there are two components in the current account deficit: balance of trade, and the second one is balance of invisibles. So the balance of trade, it has narrowed down. So that is mainly responsible for this narrowing down of the current account deficit. So to be sure, India is largely a net importer on account of its heavy dependence on energy imports. So since we are like importing around 80% of crude oil demands, domestic demands, so that's why we are having a current account deficit, or even in case of when we talk about balance of trade, there also we have the trade deficit. So because of fall in the crude oil imports, that's why we're seeing that CAD, it has narrowed down. So we're talking about the net invisible receipts. They were higher in 2022-23 due to increase in the net exports of the services and net private transfer receipts. So even though net income outgo, that was higher than a year ago. So basically in the when we talk about the balance of services trade, we enjoy a surplus there. And talking about the future expectations of the forecast about CAD, so exports, they expect that CAD is going to rise sequentially during the ongoing quarter, and current account deficit is expected to rise on quarter in first quarter of financial 24, as merchandise trade deficit, it has widened again, and the services trade surplus, it has moderated a tad. So that is going to basically lead to increasing the CAD further. Coming to Financial Express newspapers, so here let's see what are the important articles for today. So we are focusing upon making chips, semiconductor chips in India domestically. Yesterday, we took up the topic in detail in the context of India-US cooperation on this sector. So we talked that basically it would not directly lead to domestic manufacturing. Firstly, we're working upon the assembly thing, the designing thing, and gradually we can then expect that we might start manufacturing them domestically, so which is possible over time. So here we are basically trying to increase our self-reliance and also diversifying our partners, because right now we are dependent maximum upon China for these semiconductor chips. So that is basically also gives China some strategic power here in this case, because of so much reliance over China. So Adani Group, speaking on the Hindenburg report, says that it was an incidence of targeted misinformation. So he says that the group's financials, they are now healthier than ever before. So we saw what was the impact of this Hindenburg report on the Adani group of companies. So he says that a short selling incidence It resulted in several adverse consequences that we had to confront. And even though we promptly issued a comprehensive rebuttal, whereas vested interests they tried to exploit the claims made by the short seller. So we know about what do we actually mean by short selling. That's a simple thing, and we obviously took this up when this topic was in news. So again, this is talking about the current account deficit narrowing down. So the lower trade deficit and the robust services exports help in narrowing it down. So there are some issues related to the PLI scheme. So let's understand them. So in the scheme of the thing, so the time window for the firms to show the interest in the PLIs is less than 3 months. So complex guidelines exist on the eligibility and the procedures for claiming the incentives. That needs to be relooked. So that makes things a little complicated. And PLIs which could be reopened includes the ACC battery storage program, auto and auto components, and specialty steel. So with this PLI scheme, we expect the investment to rise up till rupees 2.7 trillion. And the actual investment till March was around rupees 62,000 crores. So obviously we know about the main purpose behind the PLI scheme is to again increase the domestic manufacturing, to increase the self-reliance, and that we're also promoting it through Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So these are different areas. So here you need to know about for which all categories and sectors government has announced the PLI scheme, how it actually works. The basic functioning needs to be clear. Moving further. So we know about that Byju's is in trouble. So investors they seek to clip the founder's control. So Byju it aims to raise $1 billion toward the revolt by the shareholders. So as we're seeing, its losses and costs they are going up. So you can see that blue color is showing the total income, purple is showing the total expense, and then this graph is showing the net losses. So as you can clearly see after 2018-19, when both their income and expenses were almost equal, we see from 2019-20 their expenses exceeding their income. So their net losses basically increasing, and you can see the amount of difference that exists in the figures during 2020-21. So their net losses, they have spiked up massively. So this edtech firm, it is offering sweeteners, including the preferential treatment, and in case of the liquidation also, so facing attempts by investors to dilute the founder's control over the company. So that is one of the demands by the investors. Then it is also experiencing erosion of the trust with the board members and auditors resigning, and regulatory scrutiny and ongoing dispute with the lenders is to the tune of $1.2 billion of term loan. So the company has been warding off the demands from few investors to strip Ravindran of some of his privileges given through a shareholders agreement. So according to Vodafone Idea, 55 to 60% of the MSMEs, they're digitally mature. So they're mature across industry sectors like retail, education, hospitality. They lag in the digital technology adoption, and key solutions such as collaboration, security, cloud, Internet of Things, they drive digital maturity. So yesterday, since we saw that we like celebrated yesterday the MSME Day. So what is the role of MSMEs in India's economy? How important are they? How do they act as the backbone? And what is their contribution in terms of the data that we need to have, different laws which exist, the basics about the categories on the basis of which we categorize them into micro, small, and medium enterprises on the basis of investment level, on the basis of the turnover that they record. So that needs to be clear and looked into. taking up Indian Express newspapers. So in this, we'll just go through the articles that we have not taken up so far. So security teams for the G20 ask if they can bring the long range arms and government okays only the short range ones. So following the queries from several countries, especially Israel and United States, on permission to carry the automatic and the long range weapons for the G20 summit later this year, the Ministry of Home Affairs, it is learned to have advised that only short range and manually operated weapons like pistols and revolvers, they should be allowed. So it was discussed at the coordination meeting, which was held recently to review the preparedness and the security arrangements for the VVIPs. So here we have one case study. So out of the back rooms, we see Naveen's private secretary dons the public role and holds rallies. So BJP and Congress therefore action against this IS officer. So opposition has accused him, who is like the officer is the VK Pandian, for violating the service rules. So what began as a whisper campaign about the extraordinary influence wielded by an IS officer in the Odisha government, it has spilled into the open in the state. So here basically one important trait is it is important for you to maintain the political neutrality, which is being seen violating in this case. So here BJP and Congress on like they're both on the one side in this incident. So their target is the chief minister's long-standing private secretary VK Pandian. So based on the complaint by the BJP leaders against an IS officer, the Department of Personnel and Training under the union government sent a notice to Odisha's chief secretary. So the Congress too approached this Department of uh, Training, Personnel and Training. So it complained naming this IS officer and accusing him of violation of the service conduct rules. And let's go through it further on page number 4. So multiple examples against Pandian and demanded an inquiry into this incident. So basically, the IS officer, he held a public meeting in Barpali in the Barga district where he played an audio, the CM telling the people that he had sent his private secretary to get to know their grievances. So this appeared to be a bid to silence the opposition questions over the Pandyan's recent visit to districts where he has been addressing public meetings. CM has not responded to these allegations as of now. And the CMO put out the information regarding Pandya's visit, including to a school where he spoke about 5T initiative and about the announcements he had made regarding projects like cancer hospital and then development of the temples. So 5T initiative is an initiative which is named thus for the teamwork, technology, transparency, time for transformation. So that's what 5T stands for. So the functions and the duties of these constitutional posts, like those of the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister, cannot be delegated to anyone, be it an IS officer or any other officer. So they cannot be delegated to anyone else. So he has served as a collector of Mayurbhanj and the Ganjam districts before being posted as the private secretary to the Chief Minister in 2011. And so that is the whole incident about. So what can be the role played by agriculture and allied sectors to meet the $5 trillion economy target? So India's agriculture output grew by 400% from 2000 to 2021. And here we have this entire article talking about the performance of the agricultural sector. So Around 52% of the India's population, it works in agriculture and it contributes nearly 18% to the national GDP. So this is one of the problem areas which is reflected through this data, that more than 50% of the population is basically dependent upon agriculture and their contribution is only 18%. So what we come to know is that we need to work upon agricultural productivity, and as we say, the problem of disguised unemployment that exists, so we need to ensure this structural shift of people moving out of the agricultural sector towards the manufacturing sector, industries, or the services sector. So this is one thing that we get to know or we can understand through this simple data. So it is estimated that there are nearly 145 million farmer families in the country, according to the agriculture census of 2015-16. So nearly 25% of the world's farmers, they are in India. And their contribution to national economy has its unique place. Obviously, that cannot be ignored at all. So with 11% of the total global agriculture, highest population, that is 18% of the world, 2.4% of the global land, and 5% of the water resources, and 82% of the small and the marginal farm holders, India's agriculture production has rapidly accelerated in recent years to become one of the largest farm economies in the world. So as per a World Bank report as well, between 2000 and 2021, India's agriculture output grew by 400%, from $101 billion to now $532 billion. And similarly, we have IMF data for a 23rd of April 2023. At the current prices, it shows India ranked fifth with $3.74 trillion of economy. And 10 years ago, India was at the 10th position. Right now, we are the fifth largest economy. And so we can say in 10 years, we have basically doubled our GDP. So as we see that as the economy grew, the workforce engaged in the agriculture sector sharply declined from 60%, that was in 2000, to 42% in 2019. So we are seeing that the share is declining, but that is happening at a very slower pace. So the small and medium sector enterprises of India, they're considered the engine of growth as observed by World Bank. Similarly, the small farmers, they fuel the growth in the agriculture sector. So India is also one of the leading producers of commodities like food grains, cotton, sugarcane, horticultural crops, dairy, poultry, aquaculture, and spices. And we're the largest producer of milk and dairy products. And then horticulture is also the growth driver of Indian agriculture sector, the second largest producer of fruits and vegetables. So we are ably assisted by the modern inputs and technologies. So Indian farmers, they've taken the country as the agriculture hub. So we are seeing today also the agricultural production touching new highs, but then why do we actually failed to meet the target of doubling the farmers' income? So that is also another important area. And then there is like concerns about even the GM crops. And then when we talk about the latest technology, so it is hybrid cultivators, GM cotton, sensor-based micro-irrigation, resource conservation, high-tech horticulture, artificial insemination tool in the animals, sustainable intensification and mechanization of the fields. So these are some of the new emerging areas that we're adopting to, but still obviously more needs to be done, because then why did we actually fail to meet the target of doubling the farmers' income? So we are proud to be part of the glorious journey, the greatest agricultural nation. So here we have this one advertisement. So since independence, India has stood tall as an agricultural economy, ushering prosperity for farmers and the agriculture industry. So that's there. So agriculture has been the backbone of Indian economy. Again, you can just go through this article. You will find a lot of important things here. So just try to understand them and implement them in your answers. So as I was just mentioning about doubling the farmer's income, so good quality seeds, fertilizers, agrochemicals, they can play a critical role in doubling of the farmer's income. Then with the United Nations, like it has come up over the safer, eco-friendly, cost-effective range of vector control interventions. That is something very specific. The Prime Minister is flags off 5 Vande Bharat trains, so you can see the different routes for which they've been flagged off. So Ranchi and Patna between Jabalpur and Indore, between Mumbai and Goa, and then Mumbai between Dharwad and Bengaluru. So these are different routes which have been inaugurated by the Prime Minister. We are seeing the expansion of the routes of Vande Bharat trains across India. So funding for the infrastructure development, it must account for the climate related stress. Obviously, whatever we do, this is going to be one of the dimensions or one of the areas which we cannot ignore or which needs to be a part of any discussion. So even in case of infrastructure development, we need to work in a manner that is consistent with the sustainability of the environment and which is not impacting the environment in any negative sense. So we have the national monetization pipeline, we have the national infrastructure pipeline, and contrary to the global trend in the adoption of the nature-based solutions and embracing green and the blue infrastructure, so the national infrastructure pipeline, it continues to focus on traditional gray infrastructure. So that is one area which needs to be corrected. And for instance, it champions the improvement of stormwater drainage infrastructure and eschews the integrating green infrastructure like the green roofs. So the global cities they are adopting to for the flood mitigation thing. So they are like basically taking decisions in consonance with the climate related stress. So even India cannot ignore this thing. So when we talk about the refugee influx into India after this 2021 coup in Myanmar, the problem has been framed in Manipur in incendiary language with tragic consequences. So when we talk about the refugee influx, even from the perspective of historically, like in during history also, how did we manage the refugee influx of the refugees into India, even like when we talk with the 1971 Indo-Bangladesh War, and like we have not signed the International Convention on Refugees, but despite that, we have been able to like successfully manage them. And then you can like also talk about you can connect it to ethics paper as well. The basic things, the basic rights have been given to them, be it, the basic employment opportunities or the education facilities for the children. The health services needs to be made available to them. They need to be housed and they need to be given proper habitational services. So all of that becomes important. So one of the key effect of the disruption in Myanmar since the coup of 2021 is the expansion of cultivation of opium poppy. According to United Nations Office on the Drugs and Crime, its cultivation increased significantly in 2022, and opiates accounted for larger share of the national economy than the previous year in case of Myanmar. So it is only to be expected that some of this opium cultivation would accompany the refugee influx to India, as many in Manipur they have suggested. So obviously this is also going to impact India as well. So when we talk about the golden crescent, the golden triangle, that is one thing. And the demagogic language of the narco terrorism in which the problem has been framed in Manipur may have been a product of politically engineered moral panic that overstates this problem. So here's another case study which says that commissioner's dog goes missing and Meerut police searches 500 houses and finally they are able to find this dog. So dog is not stolen. It was not stolen. Police not involved in search operations as the officer. So there are such types of case studies as well and instances that so much of efforts are taken. So the detainees, they face cruel treatment. This is the first United Nations investigator to visit the Guantanamo prison, but US disagrees with this report. So US states that in submission to the Human Rights Council, the report that the special investigator's findings, they are solely her own. The United States disagrees in significant respects with many factual and legal assertions. So we have talked a lot about the narrowing down of current account deficit. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us in the analysis session. I hope you've understood all the important topics that we discussed today. And also subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and do hit the like button for this video.